The apartment has become increasingly central in the academic discussion of the cinematic space. Many Japanese horror films produced since the early 2000s have featured apartment spaces as key setting to reflect on the social conditions of the post-economic bubble period. The cinematic presence of these done-cheap buildings communicates a culturally specific anxiety that plagues Japan after the housing bubble burst in the 1980s. My paper focuses on the apartments featured in the 2002 film Dark Water and Kotoko that was released in 2011. What these two films have in common is that they situate the plight of single mothers facing difficult living conditions. Both protagonists in the films, Yoshimi and Kotoko, experience domestic disturbances after moving into their apartments with their children. I want to concentrate on the fictional apartment as a spatial motif to expound on the performance of motherhood in modern Japan. My aim is to examine the interiority of the apartment to consider how Yoshimi and Kotoko's experience of the maternal are affected by the built space in which they live in. To give my paper a little bit of cultural context, I need to introduce the idea of the Ryosai Kenpo. It is a Japanese ideology that translates into good wife, wise mother. The system is a combination of Confucian and Western domestic ideals. It was incorporated into the social policy of the Japanese government during the Meiji era. Women are basically responsible for raising children into becoming productive members of the society. Clearly, Yoshimi's divorce and Kotoko's non-marital childbearing subvert this ideology. Their passive resistance to traditional mothering only means that they should be punished. The question is, who is doing the punishing? This is where I situate the apartment as a subject, one with a material, physical presence. My reading of the apartment intimates that its materiality and interior space mimic female corporeality as well as subjectivity. In other words, the apartment is a maternal agency that imposes the Ryosai Kenpo ideology on its occupants through spatial manipulation. The domestic space is within the territory of the female and the maternal. The symbolic origin of architecture, in fact, can be traced back to the womb as the most primitive form of dwelling for all mankind. In the Poetics of Space, Gaston Bachelard observed that life begins and closes, protected, all warm in the bosom of the house. The house, or in this case the apartment, acts as the body of the mother. Hence, I turn to the notion of the Cora, one that is conceived by Plato, but has also been discussed at length by feminist thinkers such as Elizabeth Ross, Luz Irigaray, and Julia Kristeva. The Cora is a site that associates with maternity. According to Ross, it is the concept of a space enclosed within another space. The Cora is a womb-like place, the home from which all subjects emerge, one that is shared by mother and child. My discussion of both films will address how the apartments correspond to the feminist reflection of this very concept. Now let's begin with Dark Water. The apartment in the film is clearly a maternal space, similar to the idea of the Cora. It is meant to be Yoshimi's protective dwelling right after she steps out from her marriage to a salaryman. Like many other Japanese single mothers, she encounters institutional challenges in a traditional society where discrimination against her kind is commonly practiced. Despite being in her native, Yoshimi experiences what Ross surmises as a paradoxical state of homelessness within the very home itself. While fighting for the custody rights of a child Ikuko, Yoshimi's status as a divorcee further displaces her from the culture that still clings to the idea of conventional family structure. She is considered homeless as she exists outside of the social norm. After having exiled from society, she plunges into the confined and threatening space of the apartment. The film introduces the apartment as a decaying structure that bears witness to the post-bubble recession. When Yoshimi enters the viewer unit, it becomes more apparent that the apartment has suffered from devaluation as most of the units are left abandoned without tenants. The stained moldy walls, the trickling of water in the corridors, the grim identical iron doors, the cold shabby lobby, the old-fashioned elevator, they all point to a palpable emptiness as a result of the past economic destabilization. Though the apartment is old, the agent convinces Yoshimi that it is built solid and meant to last for more years. How can this building be a maternal space if it is filled with dread? First, we must consider how the apartment building's physically enclosed space, from the narrow hallways to Yoshimi's claustrophobic unit, mimics that of a womb enveloping a fetus. The peeling wallpapers in their unit parallel to that of the uterine wall, in layers and wet. Yoshimi comments on how the dampness and humidity in the unit seems unreal, alluding to the nature of the uterus. The unseen pipes which connect the threatening water tank to the kitchen and bathroom act as the umbilical cord that nurtures the pair with fluids. Yoshimi is the one who is affected by the maternal aspects of the apartment, while Ikuko remains oblivious. This is partly because the apartment is a symbolic mother figure only to Yoshimi because she lacks one in her life. Ross isolates the Kora as an opportunity to return women to those places from which they have been dis or replaced or expelled. Yoshimi's return to the apartment signifies a return to the mother's womb. According to Christema's interpretation of the Korah, people may crave to return to maternal space for protection and privacy. Like the Korah, the apartment is a receptacle, a nurse, a nurturing mother. The scene where Yoshimi is seen unpacking her things and later playing catch with a child in the bedroom shows a somewhat warm and comforting moment of happiness. This is their private space, small yet sheltered from the threatening patriarch, as represented by Yoshimi's former husband. Despite the protection that the apartment lends to Yoshimi and her child, its agency seems to be monstrous as it aligns itself culturally with patriarchal establishment. In its will to safeguard Yoshimi, the apartment also harbors an inclination to enable Yoshimi to embrace the Ryosai Kenpo by fostering an otherwise motherless ghost child named Mitsuko. The apartment, in fact, configures the materialization of Mitsuko, who mirrors Yoshimi's past of having abandoned by her own mother. The apartment thus becomes a punishment for Yoshimi, a reverse Korra that acts out as a maternal authority to submit her back to symbolic patriarchy. The apartment affects her at an unconscious level, unleashing her fears stemming from abandonment. This indirectly precipitates her mental collapse until she undergoes a rebirth. Before the rebirth happens, a process of gestation has to occur. I will now turn to the motif of running water in the film. Water is considered a maternal symbol in Japan. The riverbed, or kawara, for example, is considered a place of rebirth, but also a violated maternal body. Water is also a regressive image of suicide and amniotic fluid. In Irigare's text, blood is the fluid that nourishes the child in the womb, and a postnatal existence consists of milk, urine, feces, mucus, and tears. Based on Kristeva's theory, all of these are considered abject. The water tank, located on the rooftop that overlooks the modern city, is most symbolic of the archaic womb. The opening sequence introduces us to its brackish, contaminated water. It gestates the body of Mitsuko in order to haunt Yoshimi, who will later arrive to stay. Yoshimi is the one who experiences the abject water the most. The boundaries, which separates Yoshimi's subjectivity from her physical environment, gradually become fluid and formless. The leakage seeps through the crevice of an otherwise solid construction, revealing her own emotional porosity due to a childhood trauma. The climax of the film takes us back to the water tank, except this time it is ripe with dark water trickling down in excess on its rusty walls. As Yoshimi runs her fingers over the water, the tank alarms her with pregnant bulges. This is a sign of labor to eradicate Yoshimi's transgressions. The birth act takes place in the elevator where the apartment separates Ikuko from Yoshimi as Mitsuko clings onto her in a moment of confusion. In this dramatic scene, Yoshimi assumes the role of the Hahamono, or self-sacrificing mother, by sparing Ikuko from danger and conceding to Mitsuko's needs for a mother. Despite Ikuko's cries, Yoshimi accepts her fate and allows for her rebirth to occur as water streams from the elevator's pores, cleansing her of the unmaternal sins. Embracing Mitsuko is an act of embracing the ideological ideal of wise motherhood. As Ikuko sobs in front of the elevator, trying to get a last glimpse of her mother, the door opens and a violent surge of polluted water crashes on her body. The apartment has finally served its purpose to restore Yoshimi according to the traditional Japanese construction of motherhood. While Dark Water's apartment is a maternal agency that influences Yoshimi to cleanse a modern identity in favor of a traditional one, the living quarters of Kotoko is one that mirrors her own subjectivity concerning motherhood. Her situation as a single mother to a child out of wedlock is presented as graphic and disturbing, indicating a form of ostracization in modern-day Japan. The apartment, however, slowly introjects Kotoko's inner resentment by becoming the unmaternal nest that resists the child in a monstrous yet subtle manner. Unlike in Darkwater, the apartment here is not a separate entity or agency. The space functions as Kotoko's alter ego. Kotoko's intimate relationship with her apartment and the living choices she is afforded with by the domestic space actually determines her psyche and shapes her identity. The film opens with Kotoko narrating her problem of having double vision. She claims to be surrounded by others, men and women alike, with their doppelgangers. Each pair has one acting indifferent and the other violent towards her. This signals a sense of prejudice and discrimination of the society towards Kotoko's status as a single mother, leaving her in a state of homelessness similar to Yoshimi. Kristeva believes that the maternal body is a site of an enfolding of otherness. This doubling foregrounds her dwelling as an alter ego that refuses to submit to the Ryosai Kenbo. Similarly, becoming a mother is indeed a process of uncanny doubling. Matters get worse when she brings Daijiro outside, and a pair of doppelgangers attack them in a split second. Due to the threats she receives from the outside world, Kotoko decides to confine her son in the apartment in a bid to protect him. As a maternal space, the Kora enables the birth of material existence gendered as masculine. In Irikare's viewpoint, women are excluded from the symbolic order and their role is reduced to becoming a womb for men, or in this case, Daijiro, to exist. The apartment has a space specifically for Daijiro to dwell in, a small tatami mat room that is cluttered with memorabilia, toys, and photographs of the two of them. To placate the distressed cries of the infant, the space magically turns into a wonderland sight with party streamers hanging and whimsical cardboard cutouts of a carnival and the city scattered on the floor. The room seems to reflect the Kora at first, a space that engenders and gives without possessing or receiving. It is also where Kotoko's infantile ego is located, revealing its vulnerability. But this space is not as innocuous as it seems. As much as Kotoko wants to believe that the apartment is a nurturing Kora, it certainly is not. It proves to be an ambivalent, if not threatening space for Daijiro, as Kotoko furtively begrudges his existence. Implicitly, the apartment has the capacity to reflect Kotoko's unconscious and unmothering desires. This is shown in the scene when Kotoko's attention on her baby is disrupted by the television that switches on its own. The screen shows devastating news concerning children. Perturbed by the news, or rather, her own cruel intention to destruct her son, she switches it off. Since the apartment corresponds to her inner subjectivity, it continues to support Kotoko's intention to orchestrate infanticide by invoking hallucinations of her dropping Daijiro onto the ground from the rooftop. Her own behavior gets even more erratic and dangerous soon after. Another scene takes place in the kitchen, a place of nourishment that is turned into a nightmare as Kotoko is seen preparing food out of hunger while cradling Daijiro in one arm. Cooking is symbolic of female submission to repeatable domestic chores. Irigare argues that women have become psychologically exiled from the places they inhabit, trapped in an endless cycle of domestic production and reproduction. The kitchen is thus another space of confinement, and as seen in the film, it is constrictive and cluttered. The space is consistently enfolded in darkness with mold-stained walls. Kotoko has difficulty accepting the burden of traditional domesticity. Failing to do so, she drops the hot pan onto the floor. Whether or not Daijiro is injured by the accident remains ambiguous. Following this episode, Kotoko is prompted by social services to give up her son by sending him to her sister who lives in the countryside. Daijiro is now protected not from the outside world, but from his own mother and the monstrous maternal space that is the apartment. Once Daijiro is no longer in the picture, Kotoko finds herself in an ironic, discomforting state of loneliness. A pervasive atmosphere of disconnection envelops the apartment as Kotoko is seen smoking in the same kitchen without a single chore to worry about. This scene echoes Irigaray sentiment on women left as receptacles for the materiality discarded by men. I was your house, she writes, and when you leave, abandoning this dwelling, I do not know what to do with these walls of mine. The impermanence of Daijiro is palpable. He is seen happier in the traditional Minka home of his aunt in Okinawa and has even grown detached from Kotoko on her visit. The spaces he had once dwelt in, Kotoko's womb and the apartment, are now discarded from his young memory. In the absence of a patriarchal figure to take care of the household, the apartment conjures the ghostly figure of Tanaka. This is done in the name of self-preservation and also to restore Kotoko's non-maternal sexual desire. Tanaka, who is supposedly a celebrated novelist, saves Kotoko from her suicide attempts in the apartment's vicinity. Their relationship soon develops into a sadomasochistic entanglement. He turns to her in self-inflicted wounds and takes the blow of a violent impulse in return. Her direct and violent assault against Tanaka is emblematic of the anger she has toward herself and her alter ego, the apartment. Losing Daijiro does not make her any happier, it seems. This does not stop Tanaka from cohabiting with her. Kotoko's once messy yet feminine living room, with bright red couch, string lights, mismatched and shoddily hung curtains, are soon filled with Tanaka's books and writing desk, a symbol of masculine intellectual. Upon moving in, he asks her to remain at home while he works. He aspires to be the Daikoku Bashira, or literally, the large black pillar that exists in traditional Japanese houses. In this context, the man is seen here as the architectural pillar that supports the roof to shelter his family. This is what her alter ego desires at first. Later, Kotoko resists the paternalist idea, and the apartment, in displaying its allegiance to her, dematerializes Tanaka into oblivion. This occurs the moment Kotoko receives news that Daijiro is to be returned to her custody, or in other words, to the maternal space. Kotoko's excitement does not last. Being a maternal figure, a real psychical material, once again proves to be a difficult position. This certainly echoes Kristeva's argument, whereby the Kora can also be a site of conflicting desires. Having Daijiro back in her life can only serve to authenticate her existence, and her final submission to the idea of wise motherhood. Soon, the apartment begins to manifest hallucinations, which further disorients Kotoko. Visions of Daijiro's death occur repeatedly before her outside of their unit, particularly in liminal spaces such as the building's entrance and rooftop. The climactic final act shows the apartment turning the television into a conduit once again. On screen, a man is shown firing an M16 in her direction before emerging out of the television set to shoot Daijiro point blank in the living room. Convinced that Daijiro is yet again in danger, Kotoko proceeds to murder her son while he is asleep. This time, it is to protect him. albeit ironically, from her and her alter ego's monstrosity. Once the deed is done, the apartment in fact celebrates Daijiro's passing by turning the tatami room once again into a surrealistic miniature carnival of flying origami and starry street lights. The space of the apartment becomes narrower, as if a stillborn is descending down a birth canal. A cardboard door opens to reveal a limp doll slumped on a red couch. This is Kotoko's own double, her alter ego, her dwelling. The couch pops into a cardboard cutout that says goal. Near Kotoko are the dolls which resemble both her and Daijiro. They lay limp on the floor, dead. The apartment has succeeded at evicting Daijiro, hence demolishing the masculine from the interior of the womb. The apartment, or the home, no longer displaces the women. In the case of Kotoko, what Ross, Irigare, and Kristeva believe the Kora to be is subverted. The apartment leaves no space or place at all for the males instead.